Hello everyone, welcome back. We're on day 3 of faith and we are back in Hebrews 11. And today, the heroes. The Bible is filled with heroes, men and women of courage and humility. And their stories are so amazing. They are a diverse bunch to say the least. But what do they all have in common? What's the source of their courage? And what drives their character? Here in Hebrews 11, we find one simple answer. And it started on verse 4. By faith, Abel brought God a better offering than Cain did. For Cain and Abel from Genesis, they both offered sacrifices to God. Why did God accept Abel's? What was different? It was simple. Abel had faith. See, Cain was a man who went through the religious motion, and Cain even knew God existed, but he didn't have faith. But how is it possible? He talked with God. How can you do that without faith? Watch his actions right afterwards. He killed his brother, and he thought he can get away with it. He thought God wouldn't see it. Today, you can go through the motion at church and still go out and sin up a full storm. And anyone who thinks they can get away with that simply doesn't believe that God is God. They lie to themselves, and often they convince themselves they'll make it to heaven on technicality. I went to church, dropped off money in the plate, and then I said a few prayers. But it's not that. That's not what going to church is. That's not what believing in God is. That's not how the walk is. That's not faith at all. Faith changes how you give and changes how you live. Look at Abel, the brother who had faith, back in verse 4. By faith, he was commended as righteous when God spoke well of his offerings. And by faith, Abel still speaks even though he is dead. Hebrews 11:4. Pay attention here. Abel's faith set him apart as righteous, right in God's sight. But hold on. Abel had faith and Abel was right with God, and yet God allowed him to be killed. Why? Here, faith gets tricky. Do we trust that God is faithful when life gets hard? Even when life ends? Hebrews 11:5 says, by faith, Enoch was taken from this life so that he did not experience death. He could not be found because God had taken him away. Do you remember Enoch's story? He walked with God, and God took him home. No death, just straight to God. That's way back in Genesis 5. And it's a big hint from the beginning at God's plan for how you and I can escape death. And it's all about faith. We are saved by grace through faith. Back here in verse 5 in Hebrews 11:5. For before he was taken, he was commanded as one who pleased God. This is huge. In every relationship, we're always trying to figure out what it takes to please the other person. Parents, friends, spouse, your boss. So what about God? Verse 6. And without faith, it is impossible to please God, because anyone who comes to him must believe that he exists and that he rewards those who earnestly seek him. You can't please God if you don't believe that God exists. It's that simple. The greatest transformation of the human soul begins with the simple conviction that God exists. And that is it. Sink those two words deep into your being. At the core of your consciousness, God is. And second, believe and trust that God rewards those who genuinely seek him. The next hero is found in verse 7. By faith, Noah, when warned about things not yet seen, in holy fear, built an ark to save his life. Noah gives us another dimension to his faith and to what faith is. He heard God's warning about things he had never seen before, but he didn't build his life on what he'd seen. He heard God's voice, and he believed what he heard. Remember, Romans 10:17 tells us that faith comes by hearing. And back here in Hebrews 7, Noah became a heir of the righteousness that comes by faith. There's those two words together again, righteousness and faith. And that is big. Righteousness means right with God. And in the Bible, righteousness is the one and only way to enter God's kingdom and ultimately go to heaven. Righteous is your only ticket. The problem is, on our own, we are not righteous. Not one of us is. So God made a plan to restore our standing, heal our relationship, and to make us right with him. We are righteous by faith. Now, it is not simply our belief that God exists that makes us righteous. Jesus died on our sins to make us righteous. But we accept it by faith. Because without faith, it doesn't happen. And there was a story that I read in the Jesus Freak articles. And this reminds me of one of those stories. A 5-year-old little boy that was walking through a city park and happened upon a man reading a book, okay? He just happened to see a man reading a book. This little boy inquired about the book that this man was reading and then told the man quite bluntly and boldly, "You had better be reading the Bible, because if you don't follow it, you will go to hell." We Christians have raised very, very funny little kids. But when this man questioned him, the kid pointed right back at his parents and said, "They'll tell you everything you need to know." How would you like to be the parent in this story? Where do you start when your 5-year-old just told a grown man that he's going to hell if he's not reading the Bible? Well, do you guys remember the last story on Richard Wurbrand? So the year is 1940, and we're in Romania. And as it turns out, he was the dad of this 5-year-old little boy. The same man who had wondered as an atheist and who irresistibly was drawn to a village, to a house where an old man gave him a Bible. And when his son told a man that he had better read the Bible or he'd be going to hell, well, Richard gladly explained to this man the story of the Bible.